Under the cover of night, thousands of elite Syrian assassins silently surround a quiet mountain town. They bring heavy war chariots, iron swords, and orders to destroy the city. But their target isn't a rival king or a military fortress. Their target is a single, unarmed prophet who is currently fast asleep in his bed. Everyone knows the famous legend of his master, the great prophet Elijah. But many people don't realize that this sleeping man, his student Elisha, takes his legacy even further. He performs more recorded miracles than any other prophet in the entire Old Testament. This prophet carries so much terrifying, raw authority that he can neutralize deadly poison with a handful of dust, strike an entire army blind with a single word, and read the secret battle plans of foreign kings from miles away. He is a walking weapon of God. Even long after he dies, his dry bones will carry so much leftover divine power that they will instantly resurrect a dead man.
Master, wake up! The army is here! We are completely surrounded! What are we going to do?
But this isn't just the story of a terrifying siege. You are about to witness the most spectacular, physics-defying miracles of the Bible's greatest apprentice. You will see him heal a bitter enemy commander, manipulate the laws of nature, and reveal an invisible, blazing army of angels hiding in the mountains. Stay with us till the end to see the shocking moment his final, earth-shattering miracle happens from the absolute darkness of the grave. If these stories connect with you, please like, subscribe, and join our Ark Builder membership to help us bring more of these epics to life. Now, let's begin. True power rarely announces itself with a trumpet. Sometimes, it just walks quietly across a plowed field. Elisha was a man of wealth, guiding massive oxen under the hot sun, his entire future perfectly mapped out, until the most dangerous man in Israel stepped into his dirt. This was Elijah, the legendary prophet of fire, the only man brave enough to stand against a wicked king and the terrifying Queen Jezebel, a ruthless tyrant who actively hunted the innocent and tried to silence the truth forever. He didn't say a single word. He simply took off his heavy camel hair cloak and threw it over the young farmer's shoulders. In that one breathtaking moment, Elisha's old life ended. He left his fortune behind, spending years following the great prophet through the wilderness. Until one day, standing near the Jordan River, heaven decided it was time for Elijah to go home. The blazing chariot smashed into the earth. The whirlwind violently gripped Elijah, lifting the great prophet alive into the terrifying, glorious presence of heaven.
My Lord, the chariots and horsemen of Israel!
And then, total silence. Elijah was gone, but resting quietly on the cracked earth was his rough camel hair mantle. Elisha walked to the edge of the rushing Jordan River. He raised the heavy mantle high above his head and struck the water with incredible force.
Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?
The river instantly split in two. The path was completely dry. Elisha stepped onto the exposed stones, his eyes burning with a new, unshakable authority. When Elisha struck the Jordan River, he was not alone. These 50 young men from Jericho had watched the entire event from a safe distance. They saw Elijah vanish into the sky. They saw Elisha return alone. And when the river parted, They knew exactly what it meant. The authority of God had officially transferred. They immediately fell to their knees in the dirt, bowing to their new leader. He was no longer the student. The era of Elisha had officially begun. Carrying the overwhelming power of God is not an easy job, and the long, brutal years of leading a nation quickly took their toll. The young farm boy was gone. The seasoned, powerful, completely bald prophet had arrived, and his first great test was already waiting. Sometime later, his travels brought the now seasoned, bald prophet to the towering gates of Jericho. It was a wealthy, heavily fortified city. But behind the thick stone walls, the citizens were facing a deadly crisis. The city elders approached Elisha.
My lord, our city is secure, but the water from our main spring is toxic.
It causes severe sickness, and it kills our crops in the dirt before the harvest.
A city cannot survive without water. The toxic spring was suffocating their economy. Elisha did not ask them to dig a new well. He simply looked at the desperate elders.
Bring me a brand new bowl and fill it with salt.
The elders looked at each other in confusion. Pouring salt into a freshwater spring would mathematically ruin it even more. But the confidence in the prophet's eyes silenced their doubts. They brought him the bowl.
This is what the Lord says. I have purified this water. It will no longer cause death or infertility.
Instantly, the dark sludge in the spring began to boil. The water rapidly turned clean and entirely safe to drink. The deadly curse was broken by a single bowl of salt. But Elisha's authority was not just for healing. The mantle he carried demanded absolute respect, and he was about to face a direct, violent challenge. He left Jericho and began the steep climb toward the city of Bethel. Bethel was the corrupt center of idol worship in the northern kingdom. For generations, the people there had mocked the true God and rejected his prophets. As Elisha walked up the winding road, a large gang of young men poured out of the city gates and blocked his path. These were not innocent children. These were aggressive, hardened youths, fully infected by the toxic culture of their city. They hated everything Elisha stood for. They saw his bald head, a mark of his age and his prophetic office, and they decided to publicly humiliate him.
Go up, you bald head! Go up!
Their chant was a deliberate insult. By screaming, "Go up," they were mocking the fiery departure of Elijah. They were essentially saying, if you are a true prophet, why don't you disappear into the sky like your master did? It was a public rejection of God's authority. Elisha stopped. He did not run away. He turned and stared directly into the eyes of the mob. The laughter died in their throats. Elisha did not raise his fists. He raised his voice, calling down a curse upon them in the name of the Lord. The judgment was instant. The bears crashed into the mob with brutal force. The youths screamed, scrambling frantically to escape the consequences of mocking the Creator's chosen messenger. 42 of the young men were torn by the beasts before the gang scattered into the hills. Elisha adjusted his rough mantle and continued walking up the road. The message to the corrupt city of Bethel was devastatingly clear. The God of Israel was not a joke, and his new prophet would not be intimidated. Word of Elisha's terrifying power spread across the kingdom like wildfire. Kings feared him. Armies avoided him. But Elisha did not just carry the wrath of God, he carried his profound, intimate mercy. In a small, crumbling stone house far from the capital, a woman was weeping on her dirt floor. She was a widow. Her husband had been a faithful student in the schools of the prophets, but he had tragically died, leaving her with massive, unpayable debts. In the ancient world, bankruptcy did not mean losing a house. It meant losing your bloodline.
Come out now! Your debt is long overdue, and I have come to collect. You have 1 week. If the silver is not in my hand by sunset on the 7th day, these 2 boys belong to me. They will be my slaves until the debt is paid in full.
The creditor turned and walked away, leaving the mother paralyzed by an unimaginable nightmare. She had absolutely nothing left to sell. She was completely out of time. Desperate, she ran through the streets until she found Elisha, collapsing at his feet.
My lord, my husband who served you is dead. You know how deeply he feared the Lord. But now a cruel creditor has come, threatening to take my 2 sons as his slaves.
Tell me, what do you still have in your house?
Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. Except a single, tiny flask of olive oil.
Elisha looked at her. He didn't offer her a loan. He didn't offer to negotiate with the ruthless creditor. He gave her a set of instructions that sounded like total madness.
Go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to one side.
The widow sprinted back to her neighborhood. She knocked on every single door, begging her friends, her neighbors, and even strangers to borrow their empty clay pots, metal bowls, and massive storage jugs. The neighbors whispered in utter confusion, watching this frantic, sobbing woman drag dozens of empty, useless jars back into her small house. She carried the final heavy pot inside and slammed the wooden door shut, bolting it tight. The world was locked out. It was just her 2 terrified sons, a floor covered in empty clay, and 1 tiny flask of oil. She looks at the tiny flask. It feels like absolutely nothing against her massive debt. But God doesn't need us to have everything figured out. He just asks us to step out in faith with the little we have. If you are trusting God to take whatever small amount of strength or hope you have left and multiply it today, drop down and comment, "Use what I have right now." Her hands shook wildly as she picked up the small flask. She tipped it over the first massive clay jar. The first massive jar filled completely to the brim. She moved the tiny flask to the next pot. It filled too.
Bring me another one! Quickly!
Her sons frantically slid the heavy jars across the dirt floor. She poured and poured and poured. The golden oil defied every law of nature, multiplying infinitely from the tiny flask. The air filled with the rich, heavy scent of pure, incredibly valuable olive oil. Finally, she tipped the flask over the last container.
This one is also full. Bring me another jar.
There are no more, Mother. Every single jar in the house is completely full.
The very second the last vessel was filled, the oil in her small flask instantly stopped flowing. God had provided exactly the amount of capacity she had prepared in faith. If she had borrowed 1,000 jars, they all would have been filled. She ran back to Elisha, breathless, her clothes stained with the golden oil.
Go, sell the oil, and pay your massive debt. You and your sons can live on the money that is left over.
The cruel creditor was paid in full. The boys were saved. The widow's nightmare was completely over. God had proven that when a faithful heart is backed into a corner, He can turn absolutely nothing into an overwhelming, life-saving abundance. But while Elisha was saving a single family in secret, a massive geopolitical disaster was unfolding. 3 powerful kings were marching their armies straight into a blistering, deadly desert trap, and they were about to run out of water. Elisha's private miracles brought hope to the broken, but the geopolitical chaos of the world was about to drag the prophet straight into a massive military disaster. The king of Moab had rebelled against Israel, refusing his annual tribute of sheep. Furious, King Joram of Israel formed an alliance with the kings of Judah and Edom. 3 massive armies marched aggressively into the brutal desert of Edom to crush the rebellion. But they made a catastrophic tactical error, marching 7 grueling days without properly scouting the water supply.
This is a total disaster! The Lord has brought us 3 kings out here in the desert just to hand us over to the Moabites. We are completely dead.
Is there no prophet of the Lord here? We can ask the Lord what to do through him.
A high-ranking officer stepped forward, pointing toward the edge of the camp.
Elisha, the man who used to pour water on the hands of Elijah, is traveling with the army.
The 3 most powerful men in the region abandoned their royal tents, desperately hiking across the burning sand. They found Elisha sitting quietly in the shade of a rocky outcropping. He did not stand up or bow. He simply glared furiously at King Joram. King Joram was the son of the wicked Queen Jezebel. His parents had spent their lives hunting Elisha's mentor, Elijah. Elisha knew Joram only cared about God when he was desperate.
Why are you coming to me? Go to the fake pagan prophets of your wicked father and mother.
No, please. The Lord has brought us 3 kings out here to be slaughtered.
Elisha looked past the wicked king, staring directly at Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat was different than King Joram. He had destroyed his nation's fake idols. He actually taught his people to love the one true God. But the crazy part is, these 2 kings were family. Joram's evil sister, Athaliah, had married King Jehoshaphat's own son. Years later, Athaliah would become far worse than her mother, Jezebel. She would try to violently wipe out David's entire bloodline. But that terrifying, violent future hadn't been written just yet. Today, Elisha simply took a breath and protected the righteous king.
As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, if I did not have respect for the presence of King Jehoshaphat of Judah, I would not even look at you or notice you. But now bring me a harpist.
In the midst of a dying, panicked army, a single harpist sat in the sand and played a deeply calming melody. As the music echoed across the rocks, the furious anger drained from Elisha's face, replaced by the heavy, undeniable weight of the Lord.
This is what the Lord says. Dig trenches all over this dry valley. You will see neither wind nor rain, but this valley will be completely filled with water. You, your cattle, and your massive army will drink.
It was an absolutely insane command. Digging in hard, baked clay under a blazing sun while actively dying of dehydration was a death sentence. But the kings ordered their soldiers to dig. The night passed in total silence. Not a single drop of rain fell. There was no thunder, no storm clouds. But at the exact moment of the morning sacrifice, a low, rumbling sound echoed from the distant highlands. A massive flash flood of pure water surged down the dry canyons, instantly filling every single trench. The dying army plunged their faces into the water, screaming in absolute triumph. They were saved. But God was not finished. The water was about to become the ultimate weapon. Miles away, the Moabite army had marched to the border, heavily armed and ready to slaughter the weakened alliance. As the morning sun rose over the mountains, the red light struck the newly filled trenches in the valley below. The region of Edom literally means red. The flash flood had swept up the red desert clay, turning the trench water thick and crimson. Combined with the sunrise, the illusion of a bloody battlefield was mathematically and geographically perfect.
Look at the valley! That is blood! The three kings must have fought and slaughtered each other in the night! Everyone! To the plunder! Attack! Get off me!
The Moabites completely broke their defensive formations. Thinking the battle was already won, they threw down their heavy shields and charged wildly into the Israelite camp, expecting to find dead bodies and free gold. Instead, they ran face first into a fully refreshed, heavily armed, highly organized military machine.
Attack! Attack!
The ambush was devastating.
We must
The Moabites were absolutely crushed, pushed all the way back to their capital city. Elisha's prophecy was perfectly fulfilled. Elisha had just saved 3 kings and an entire army on the battlefield. But his most heartbreaking and impossible test wasn't going to be fighting a war. It was waiting in a quiet, wealthy house miles away, where a single promise was about to be made. The fame of Elisha was now unmatched. He was the man who could command water in the desert and destroy armies without lifting a sword. But true prophets are not defined by the wars they win. They are defined by the people they see. Elisha traveled frequently through the town of Shunammite. The constant walking across the harsh roads was exhausting. But a wealthy, prominent woman in the city noticed the tired prophet and insisted he stop at her estate for a hot meal.
Husband, I know this man is a holy man of God.
Let us build a small room on our roof with a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp.
Then he will have a quiet place to rest whenever he comes to us.
Her husband agreed. They constructed a peaceful stone sanctuary perfectly designed for a tired traveler. Elisha wanted to reward her. He called her up to the room.
You have gone to all this trouble for us. What can I do for you? Do you need a word spoken to the king or the commander of the army?
I have a home among my own people. I am perfectly content. I need no political favors.
She politely walked back downstairs, but Elisha could not let it go.
Gehazi, what can we possibly do for a woman who already has everything? She doesn't have everything. She has no son, and her husband is very old.
In the ancient world, a childless house didn't just mean a quiet home. Without a male heir, a widow faced total economic ruin, and her bloodline would permanently die. Elisha knew exactly what God wanted to do.
Call her back inside, Gehazi. She did not ask for a reward, but heaven is going to give her the one thing she truly desires.
The woman returned, standing respectfully in the doorway. Elisha looked at her with piercing certainty.
About this time next year, you will hold a son in your arms.
No, my lord. Please, man of God, do not lie to me. Do not get my hopes up for a miracle that cannot happen.
But the word of the Lord does not return empty. The very next year, exactly as the prophet promised, she held a crying, healthy baby boy in her arms. God had rewarded her kindness with the ultimate gift of life. But a few years later, the joyous noise of that child would be violently silenced by a single, scorching afternoon in the wheat fields. The boy grew older, strong, and deeply loved by his parents. One bright, blistering morning, he ran out to the massive wheat fields to help his father supervise the harvest. The sun was beating down intensely on the golden grain. Suddenly, the boy grabbed his head, stumbling wildly into the tall wheat.
My head! My head hurts!
His father, busy calculating the harvest, didn't realize how serious it was.
Servant, quickly, carry the boy back to his mother.
She held him for hours, praying desperately as the sun climbed to the peak of the sky. And then, at exactly noon, the boy stopped breathing. He went completely limp in her arms. The child of the promise was dead. She did not scream. She did not tear her clothes or fill the city with the traditional wailing of the ancient world. Instead, a terrifying, steely silence fell over her. She picked up the heavy, lifeless body of her son, carried him up the stone stairs, and laid him directly on the bed of the prophet Elisha. She walked out, shut the wooden door, and locked it. She marched downstairs, climbed onto a donkey, and ordered her servant to run alongside and drive the animal forward as fast as possible.
Why are you going to see the prophet today? It isn't a holy day or a festival.
It is well.
She refused to tell him that their son was dead. If she told the truth, the funeral would start immediately.
Do not slow down the donkey unless I tell you.
Instead, she saddled her donkey and raced toward Mount Carmel. She had to find Elisha before it was too late. She rode like a warrior going to battle, galloping furiously toward Mount Carmel. Elisha saw the dust rising from miles away and sent Gehazi running to meet her.
Is everything all right? Are you well? Is your husband well? Is the boy well?
Everything is well.
She completely ignored the servant and pushed past him. She threw herself onto the dirt at Elisha's feet, grabbing him by the ankles in utter desperation. Gehazi furiously tried to pull her away for being disrespectful.
Leave her alone! Her soul is crushed, and the Lord has completely hidden it from me. I had no warning.
Did I ask you for a son, my lord? Didn't I explicitly tell you, do not raise my hopes?
Elisha's blood ran cold. He realized instantly what had happened.
Gehazi, tuck your cloak into your belt, take my wooden staff,
and run as fast as you can. Do not stop to greet anyone on the road. Lay my staff directly on the boy's face.
Gehazi sprinted away, but the mother refused to move.
As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you.
She knew a wooden stick could not save her son. She needed the presence of God. Elisha stood up, deeply moved by her fierce, unyielding faith, and followed her back to Shunem. When they finally arrived, Gehazi met them in the courtyard. He shook his head. He had placed the staff on the boy's face, but there was no sound, no movement. The boy was entirely dead. Elisha paced the small room. He dropped to his knees and prayed to the Lord with a fierce, roaring desperation. Then he did something highly unusual. He climbed onto the bed and stretched his own body directly over the boy. He placed his mouth on the boy's mouth, his eyes on the boy's eyes, and his hands on the boy's cold, lifeless hands. This was not an ancient medical procedure. Elisha was acting as a literal, physical conduit. He was pressing his living flesh against the dead, using his own body to violently channel the life-giving fire of the Holy Spirit directly into the corpse. Slowly, impossibly, the flesh of the boy's chest began to grow warm. But the boy did not wake up. Elisha stood up, completely exhausted, sweating profusely. He paced back and forth across the small room, wrestling with the silence of death. He refused to accept defeat. He climbed back onto the bed and stretched himself over the boy a second time. Then, miraculously, the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. Elisha fell back against the wall, panting, completely overwhelmed by the terrifying, beautiful power of God.
Gehazi! Quickly! Call the Shunammite!
The mother rushed up the stairs and burst through the door. Elisha pointed to the bed.
Come, you can pick up your son.
She didn't say a single word. She collapsed to the floor, bowing in total reverence at the prophet's feet, weeping uncontrollably. She stood up, grabbed her breathing boy, pulled him tight against her chest, and walked out of the room. Elisha had just defeated death in a quiet, private room. But outside those walls, a brutal, national famine was sweeping across the land, and the very next deadly threat was aimed directly at his own students. Elisha's power was absolute, but the daily struggles of the nation were far from over. A severe, devastating famine swept across the region of Gilgal. The ground turned to dust, and finding food became a deadly challenge, even for the prophets. Elisha was teaching a large class of the young prophets. Seeing their exhaustion, he ordered his servant to put a massive iron pot on the fire and boil a thick stew for the men. One of the eager young students ran out into the dry fields to search for any surviving vegetables. The men were absolutely starving. They eagerly filled their bowls and took massive bites. Instantly, chaos erupted. Men spat the food onto the dirt, clutching their throats and gagging violently.
Man of God! There is death in the pot!
The wild gourds were highly toxic. The entire meal was ruined, and in a famine, losing a massive pot of food was a devastating blow. But Elisha remained perfectly calm.
Bring me some flour.
He grabbed a handful of simple, crushed grain and casually tossed it directly into the boiling, poisoned stew.
Now serve it to the men, so they can eat.
The toxic, bitter poison was entirely neutralized.
Delicious.
The men ate until they were completely full, marveling at how even a handful of dust could become a tool of salvation in Elisha's hands. But the severe famine was still devastating the land. A few days later, a faithful farmer arrived carrying a small sack of just 20 barley loaves. It was a generous gift, but Elisha had 100 starving men to feed.
Take the bread. Give it to the people to eat.
How can I set this before 100 men? They will fight over the crumbs.
For this is what the Lord says, they will eat and have some left over.
He broke the first loaf. As the young prophets handed the bread out, the baskets miraculously never emptied. 100 men ate until they were completely full. And just as the Lord promised, there was food left over. But Elisha didn't just care about food. He cared about the quiet, heavy anxieties of his students. The school of prophets was growing so fast that their small living quarters were completely overflowing. They begged Elisha to let them travel to the Jordan River to cut down trees and build a massive new meeting hall. Elisha agreed and traveled with them. Suddenly, one of the students swung his tool with too much force. The heavy, incredibly expensive iron axe head slipped off the wooden handle, sailed through the air, and vanished into the deep, muddy waters of the Jordan.
Oh no, my lord! It was borrowed!
In ancient times, an iron axe was a massive financial investment. This young student was now trapped in deep, unpayable debt for losing a tool that didn't belong to him. He was totally humiliated and terrified. Elisha didn't scold him for being careless. He didn't tell him to dive into the dangerous current.
Show me exactly where it fell.
The student pointed to the murky, swirling water. Elisha walked to a nearby tree, snapped off a small, dry wooden stick, and casually tossed it into the exact spot where the heavy iron had sunk.
Lift it out.
The young student reached out, completely stunned, and grabbed the heavy iron from the surface of the water. The laws of physics had completely surrendered to the authority of God. Whether it was toxic stew or a sunken tool, Elisha proved that God's power is not just reserved for massive, fiery showdowns on mountains. God cares deeply about the small, terrifying accidents of everyday life. Elisha's miracles had saved widows and young students, but the explosive power of the mantle was about to cross international borders and crash directly into a foreign superpower. Naaman was the commander of the massive army of Aram. He was a highly decorated war hero, feared by kings and dripping in gold. When he rode his chariot through the streets of Damascus, crowds bowed in total reverence. But beneath his heavy, shining armor, Naaman hid a terrifying, shameful secret. He was rotting alive. He had leprosy. In his vast household lived a young, enslaved Israelite girl, taken captive during a violent border raid. She was powerless, but her faith was incredibly strong.
If only my master would go to see the prophet in Samaria. He would heal him of his terrible leprosy.
The powerful general was so utterly desperate that he actually listened to a captive child. Naaman packed thousands of pounds of silver and gold and rode a massive, heavily armed military convoy straight to the humble doorstep of Elisha's house. Naaman stood in his shining armor, expecting the prophet to run out, bow deeply, wave his hands in a massive, theatrical ritual, and cure him on the spot. But Elisha didn't even open the door.
My master says, "Go and wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan River, and your skin will be completely cured."
Naaman felt the deep, burning sting of military insult. He had brought an entire army and a king's ransom, and the prophet wouldn't even give him the dignity of stepping outside.
Are not the beautiful rivers of my own country far better than all the dirty waters of Israel? I thought he would at least come out and call on the name of his God.
The crystal-clear rivers of Damascus were world-famous, while the Jordan was notoriously muddy. Being told to bathe in foreign mud was the ultimate insult. Naaman angrily whipped his horses and stormed away. But his loyal officers rode up beside him.
My lord, if the prophet had told you to do some great, impossible, heroic task, wouldn't you have done it? Why not simply wash and be cured?
Naaman swallowed his massive pride. He climbed down from his golden chariot, removed his heavy, impressive armor, and waded into the murky waters of the Jordan. Naaman sprinted back to Elisha's house. This time, Elisha came out. Naaman stood before the bald prophet, completely humbled, tears streaming down his fierce warrior face.
Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. Please accept a gift from your servant.
Naaman ordered his men to bring forward the massive chests of silver and gold. It was enough wealth to buy a city.
As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a single thing.
Elisha refused the money. He wanted Naaman to know that the grace of the true God cannot be purchased. Naaman bowed in deep respect and began the long journey home. But hiding in the shadows of the doorway, Elisha's servant Gehazi was furiously grinding his teeth.
My master let this wealthy foreigner walk away with his gold. As surely as the Lord lives, I am going after him to get what we are owed.
Gehazi sprinted down the road and flagged down Naaman's chariot. He lied directly to the general's face, claiming Elisha had suddenly changed his mind and needed silver and clothing for 2 unexpected guests. Naaman gladly gave him double what he asked. Gehazi hauled the heavy bags of treasure back to the house, quickly hid them, and casually walked into the room where Elisha was waiting.
Where have you been, Gehazi? Your servant didn't go anywhere.
Elisha's eyes narrowed into a terrifying, piercing glare.
Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to be taking money and clothes?
Gehazi stepped backward, his heart pounding in utter terror.
Because you have done this, Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever.
Gehazi stumbled out of the prophet's presence, a ruined man. He had gained a little silver, but he lost his future, proving you cannot manipulate the power of God for your own greed. Elisha had just proven his power could cross international borders. But that very power was about to make him the primary target of a furious foreign kin, bringing a massive Syrian armada straight to his front door. Naaman left Israel in peace, but his king in Syria was absolutely furious. The king of Aram was attempting to launch a highly classified, devastating war against Israel. But every single time the Syrian army set a trap, the king of Israel completely avoided it.
Which one of you is the traitor? Who is secretly leaking our highly classified military plans to the king of Israel?
None of us, my lord. It is Elisha, the prophet in Israel. He tells his king the very words you speak in your own private bedroom.
The king of Aram slammed his fist on the table. If a single, bold prophet was ruining his war, he would wipe him off the face of the earth. Spies reported Elisha was staying in a small, completely unprotected farming town called Dothan. Under the cover of total darkness, a massive military armada rolled across the hills. Thousands of Syrian soldiers and brutal war chariots completely surrounded the tiny city. There was absolutely no way out. As the sun rose, Elisha's new young servant woke up and walked out onto the roof. The servant screamed and sprinted downstairs, bursting into Elisha's room.
Oh no, my lord! What shall we do? We are completely surrounded! We are dead!
Elisha didn't even flinch. He casually poured himself a cup of water, completely unbothered that the most powerful army in the world was outside his front door.
Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them.
The servant looked around the empty room in total confusion. It was just the two of them. Elisha gently placed a hand on the terrified boy's shoulder and prayed a very simple prayer.
O Lord, open his eyes so he may see.
The servant gasped, falling to his knees. Next to the overwhelming power of the armies of heaven, the massive Syrian military looked like a tiny group of helpless ants. The invisible world was far more real and far more heavily armed than the physical one. The Syrian commanders ordered the attack. But Elisha did not ask the chariots of fire to burn them. He prayed a different prayer.
Strike this army with blindness.
Instantly, the terrifying Syrian army ground to a chaotic halt. Thousands of heavily armed soldiers stumbled blindly into each other, dropping their weapons and rubbing their sightless eyes in total panic. Elisha confidently strolled right out of the city gates and up to the blind commanders.
You are on the wrong road, boys. This isn't the right city. Follow me, and I will lead you directly to the man you are looking for.
It was a masterful psychological trap. Elisha led the blind, stumbling Syrian armada on a grueling 12-mile hike. They marched straight to Samaria, the heavily fortified capital of Israel. The king of Israel stood on the city walls, utterly baffled as he watched a single bald prophet casually guide the entire enemy army through his front gates. Once the Syrians were locked safely inside the massive stone courtyard, Elisha finally prayed for their eyes to be opened. The king of Israel eagerly drew his sword, ready to order a massive slaughter.
My lord, shall I kill them?
No, do not kill them. Prepare a massive feast. Set food and water before them, and send them back to their master.
The Syrian soldiers were completely stunned. Instead of being brutally executed, they were treated to a luxurious royal banquet. When they were full, they were sent home in total shame. The absolute, crushing mercy of Elisha's trap was so psychologically devastating that Syrian raiding parties never entered Israel again. Elisha had won a massive international war without spilling a single drop of blood. But the one enemy the great prophet could not defeat was time. Decades later, the fire of the mantle was finally fading. The years of miracles, battles, and impossible victories eventually caught up with the man who carried the mantle. Decades later, Elisha was very old and suffering from a severe, terminal illness. The great prophet was finally dying. King Joash, the new, young ruler of Israel, heard the devastating news. He rushed to Elisha's bedside, weeping bitterly. He knew that without Elisha's terrifying spiritual authority, the nation was completely vulnerable to invasion.
My lord, the chariots and horsemen of Israel.
Elisha weakly opened his eyes. Even on his deathbed, with his breath failing, the fire of the Lord still burned intensely in his chest. He didn't want the king's tears. He wanted the king's faith.
Get a bow and some arrows.
The king quickly grabbed a heavy wooden bow. Elisha slowly raised his frail, shaking hands, placing them directly over the strong, youthful hands of the king.
Open the east window, now! Shoot! The Lord's arrow of victory! The arrow of victory over Aram! You will completely destroy the Arameans at Aphek!
Elisha fell back onto his pillow, coughing heavily. He pointed to the remaining arrows in the king's quiver.
Take the arrows. Now, strike the ground.
King Joash grabbed the bundle of arrows. Elisha had just declared that these arrows represented God's victory, making this a physical test of the king's passion. But Joash was half-hearted. He casually tapped the arrows on the dirt floor. 1, 2, 3. And then he stopped. Elisha was absolutely furious. By doing the bare minimum, the king proved he lacked the relentless, uncompromising faith needed to finish the enemy.
You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have completely destroyed Aram. But now, because of your weak faith, you will only defeat them 3 times.
Those were the final, fiery words of the greatest prophet in Israel. Elisha closed his eyes, and the man who had performed double the miracles of his master finally died. They wrapped his body, placed him in a stone tomb, and rolled a heavy rock over the entrance. A year passed. The flesh decayed. Only the dry, ancient bones of the great prophet remained in the dark, silent cave. The era of Elisha seemed permanently over. But the power of God is not limited by the grave. During the spring season, a violent band of Moabite raiders suddenly invaded. A small group of terrified Israelites were in the middle of a funeral, carrying a dead body toward a graveyard. Suddenly, they heard the terrifying screams of the raiders charging over the hill. The dead man's body tumbled down the stone steps in the dark, crashing onto the tomb floor and rolling directly into the ancient, dry bones of Elisha. The very millisecond the dead flesh touched the bones of the prophet, the impossible happened. Elisha was dead, but the devastating, life-giving power of the Holy Spirit still resonated so fiercely in his very bones that death itself was instantly shattered on contact. Elisha's legacy was sealed forever. He was a man who burned his past, commanded the waters, saw the invisible armies of heaven, and proved to the world that the power of the Creator does not end when his servants die. Elisha's unbelievable journey reminds us that the power of God is not restricted by human limitations, impossible odds, or even the grave itself. When you are completely surrounded by the enemy, remember the fiery chariots of Dothan. There are far more with you than there are against you. Congratulations, because you made it to the very end of this massive, epic story. You have officially earned the Legacy of Fire badge. To claim your badge, drop down to the comments and type this exact phrase, Legacy of Fire.
Hi guys, These videos take many, many days of hard work. If you could, please like, subscribe, and join as our Ark Builder member to support us. Also, we want to see which countries our videos reach. If you could, please comment which country you're watching from. It'll truly help us. Thank you. See you in the next video.
The Queen Mother has gone completely mad. She is slaughtering the entire royal family.
Give him to me. We must hide him in the temple. He is the absolute last surviving heir of King David.